The bell over the door rang at 5:52 on a Tuesday, 8 minutes before close, and June Calloway did not yet know she had been signing death warrants for 14 months. Snow was coming down in the slow, heavy way it did in Silver Hollow that time of year. The flakes fat as coins, muffling the whole mountain town, until the only sound in the shop was the refrigeration hum of the display cooler and the whisper of her own scissors. She was trimming stargazer lilies for the standing order, the discreet client, the corporate account, the miracle that had kept her doors open when every other small business on Aspen Street had gone dark. She heard the bell. She did not look up right away. She'd learned that the last customer of the day was almost always someone lonely who wanted to be talked to, and she'd learned to give them the talking, gently. "We close at 6, she said, "but if it's an emergency bouquet, I've broken 100 worse rules." No answer, just the door easing shut against the wind, and then a silence with weight to it, a silence that seemed to change the temperature of the room. June looked up. The man filling her doorway did not belong to Silver Hollow. She knew this the way you know a wolf isn't a dog. He wore a black overcoat dusted white at the shoulders, no hat, snow melting and dark hair. His face was carved and still, the kind of stillness that costs something to maintain. He was not looking at the flowers. He was looking at her steadily without heat, the way a man looks at the one thing in a room he came for. "June Calloway," he said, not a question. "That's the name on the sign." She set down her scissors slow and put her hands flat on the cool marble of the counter where he could see them. Some old animal instinct did that for her. "What can I get you?" "I need to see your order book." His voice was low, unhurried, almost gentle, and somehow that was worse than a raised voice would have been. The special account, the one that pays in advance in cash every quarter, the one you've never met. Her mouth went dry. That account was the shop's spine. That account was her mother's medical bills paid, the lease renewed, the lights on. "Those are private records," she said, "and I don't know you." "No," he agreed, "you don't." He took one step closer, and the cooler light caught the faint scar that ran through his left eyebrow. "But you've been working for me for over a year, Miss Calloway, and in that time you have helped kill 9 people. The furnace kicked on somewhere under the floor. June heard her own pulse in her ears. "Get out of my shop," she said. "In a minute." He reached into his coat. She flinched and drew out, not a weapon, but a slim leather notebook, the pages soft from handling. He set it on the counter between them and opened it to a column of dates. Beside each date, in a cramped hand that was not hers, was a name. "You take an order," he said, "always the same format, a specific list of flowers, a specific handwritten card, a specific delivery date. You fill it beautifully. You're the best in 3 counties, which is exactly why he chose you, and then you sign your own name to the card and send it out." He turned the notebook so she could read it. "Every arrangement is a sentence in a language older than either of us, and every date is a funeral you scheduled." "That's insane." But her eyes were already moving down the column, and her heart was already doing the terrible arithmetic. October 9th, white chrysanthemum rue, a card that said, "Rest now, old friend." She remembered it. She remembered thinking it was oddly sad for a corporate gift. October 9th was the night the Cord family's oldest capo, a man she had never heard of named Emil Vance, had been found in his car outside Denver with 2 bullets in him. "You know the language," the man said, watching her face. "You know it better than you've let yourself understand. White chrysanthemum for a death, rue for regret and for warning, yellow carnation for rejection, for you are no longer wanted here, cypress for mourning, purple hyacinth for, I'm sorry, Miss Calloway, is what you send to a man the night before you have him shot." He tapped the page. "You've been fluent for 14 months. You just thought you were being poetic." June's legs did not feel like her own. She gripped the counter. "Who are you?" For the first time, something moved behind his eyes, not softness, but the memory of it. "My name is Adrian Cord," he said. "The account you've been filling belongs to my family, and someone has been using your hands to murder my people and sign my name to it." She did not scream. Later she'd wonder why. Later she'd understand that some part of her had known for months that the beautiful account was wrong, that no company sent funeral flowers to living men every single week, that no card was ever addressed to anyone, that the delivery addresses changed, but the strange grief in the arrangements never did. She had known, and she had chosen the lights staying on. She had chosen not to read her own handwriting. "If that's true," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, "then I'm a witness, and you're a man who kills witnesses." "If I killed witnesses," Adrian said, "you would have been dead a year ago." He let that sit. "I have been watching your shop since the third body. I have stood across the street in weather worse than this. I have read every order before it left this counter, and I could not stop them without exposing that I knew, which would have gotten you killed and taught me nothing. So I let it run, and I let you live, and I hated every date on that list." He closed the notebook. "You are the only person alive who can identify the man placing these orders, which means as of tonight, you are the most valuable person in Colorado and the most hunted." Outside, twin cones of headlight swept across the snow-fogged window, a black SUV moving slow. Adrian saw it in the reflection of the cooler glass before she did. Everything about him changed, not louder, but harder, a blade coming out of velvet. How many exits? What? Exits. Now. Back door, through the workroom. The window came apart. She never heard the shots, only the glass, a wall of it blowing inward, with a sound like the sky tearing. And then she was on the floor, because Adrian Cord had crossed the room and taken her down behind the counter with his whole body over hers. One hand splayed across the back of her head, pressing her face into his shoulder as the display cooler burst, and the lilies rained down around them, white, and then where the glass had opened, his forearm red. The card she'd been about to file was still in her fist. In the sudden ringing quiet, she looked at it without meaning to. It said, in her own careful hand, "For Marcus, with love always." Marcus Cord, Adrian's brother. Delivery date, Thursday. "That's your brother," she whispered against his coat, and felt him go rigid. The next one, "It's your brother, Thursday." Adrian lifted his head an inch. Snow was blowing in through the ruined window and settling on the wreck of her life's work, and his blood was warm where it had soaked through to her collarbone, and his eyes, when they found hers, were the eyes of a man who has just been handed the one thing he cannot survive losing. "Then we have 3 days," he said, "to make you a liar." He took her out the back through the workroom, moving her ahead of him with a hand flat between her shoulder blades, and she was ashamed of how her body followed his without argument, as if it had decided he was survival and left her mind to catch up. A second SUV was already idling in the alley. His, this one with a driver who did not so much as glance at her, only at Adrian's bleeding arm, and said, "How bad?" "Not mine that matters," Adrian said, and put June in the back seat and got in beside her, and the car was moving before the door had shut. She should have been terrified of him. She was terrified of him. But she was more terrified of the notebook of the 14 months of "For Marcus," with love, always in her own handwriting, and terror. She was learning as a thing that has to attach itself to something, and it kept attaching to him, because he was the only fixed point in a world that had just come apart. "You're bleeding," she said. "I've noticed. Give me your arm." He looked at her. In the passing light, his face was unreadable, but he turned his forearm over and let her push the ruined sleeve back. And she did what she always did with her hands when the rest of her was drowning. She went to work. She unwound the silk ribbon still looped around her wrist from the shop, folded it into a pad, bound the gash above his wrist, tight and clean. Her fingers not quite steady, but her knots perfect. He watched her do it the entire time, not the wound, her. "You should be screaming," he said quietly. "I did all my screaming when the account first came in," she said, "and I called it gratitude." She tied off the ribbon. "There, it'll hold till a real bandage." For a moment, neither of them moved. His arm was still in her hands. The heat came off him in the cold car. And June felt underneath the fear the first thread of a different and much more dangerous thing, the pull of a man who had covered her body with his, without a second's hesitation, whose blood was on her because of it, who had watched over her for a year from across a freezing street and never once let her know she wasn't alone. She let go of his arm. "Where are you taking me?" she said. "Somewhere no one has ever ordered flowers," Adrian said, and looked out at the snow. The safe house was a stone lodge above the tree line, glass on the mountainside, dark timber, a fire already laid, as though someone had known they'd come. He walked her through it once. Exits. The panic room behind the pantry, the sight lines with the clipped economy of a man who thought about death, the way she thought about color and stem length. Then he left her at the fire with a first aid kit and a glass of something amber, and went to make calls in another room, in a voice too low to follow. June sat with the untouched drink and the fire, and tried to be a person again. The first thing she understood sitting there was that she was not innocent, not in the way she wanted to be. She had made those arrangements, her taste, her eye, her hands. The cipher was cruel precisely because it was true. She had always spoken the old language, had learned it from her grandmother in a garden, in a warmer place, had chosen rue over rosemary because rue was more beautiful, and never once let herself hear what she was saying. Someone had looked at her, at the whole shape of her gift, and seen a weapon nobody would ever suspect. The cruelty of it was the flattery. They had used the best of her. The second thing she understood was harder. When Adrian came back and sat across from her and the firelight moved over the exhaustion he wouldn't admit to, she understood that he was not angry at her. He had every reason to be. His people were dead, his name was on it, and he wasn't. He was angry at whoever had done this to her. "Why did you watch me for a year?" she asked, instead of just closing the account. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Because whoever built the second cipher is inside my family," he finally said. "Someone with the codes I gave to maybe 4 people alive. Every order was a message I couldn't read that was killing men loyal to me and making it look like I'd ordered it. My own captains started to believe it. I needed the sender, not the channel. Close the shop, and he moves the channel, and I lose the only thread I have." His jaw tightened. And there was a second reason which I did not examine and should have. What was it? He looked at her across the fire, and for a moment the mask was simply gone, and what was under it was so much rawer than she expected that she almost looked away. "I liked knowing you were there," he said. "The one clean thing I owned and didn't have to bleed for. I told myself it was surveillance. I stood in the cold to protect an asset. Then it was November, and you strung lights in the window, and I realized I'd been standing there an hour after the last order was filled, watching a woman who didn't know I existed hang up lights, and I understood that I was in a great deal of trouble." He set his glass down very precisely. "I'm telling you this because you should know exactly what I am before you decide to trust me. I am not a good man, June. I have done everything they say I've done except the 9 on that list, but I have never once wanted to keep something the way I want to keep you safe." The fire popped. The snow ticked against the glass. "That's not romance," June said very carefully, because her heart was pounding, and she did not trust it. "That's ownership." "Yes," Adrian said without apology. "For most of my life, those have been the same word. You're going to have to teach me the difference, and we're going to have to do it in 3 days, because on Thursday, someone I love is supposed to die by your hand, and I would burn this state to the ground before I let that touch you." He stood. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow you're going to teach me to read flowers, and I'm going to teach you to read a lie. One of us is going to catch him first." He was at the door when she said Adrian. He stopped. "The card tonight," she said. "For Marcus, with love always. I didn't write that today. That order came in 3 weeks ago. Prepaid. Post-dated." She swallowed. "Whoever's doing this planned your brother's death 3 weeks ago, which means it isn't panic. It isn't reaction to you finding me." She met his eyes. "It's a schedule, and we're already behind on it." She watched the knowledge land on him, watched the man who feared nothing find the one thing that frightened him, and she thought, "I did that. My hands did that." And then she thought, with a clarity that scared her more than the gunfire had, "And now I'm going to use them to undo it." They worked through the night and into a white blind morning. June spread every order she could remember across the great table. She had a florist's memory, precise and total. Could recall the exact stems of an arrangement she'd built 11 months ago. And Adrian brought the notebook, and together they built the Rosetta Stone of the thing. Chrysanthemum plus rue plus a card of farewell meant an execution of a made man, someone with rank. Yellow carnation meant a demotion, made permanent. Cypress, and a child's name. There had been one once that had made June sick when she understood it meant a family was to be left alive, but shown they were unprotected. The flowers named the target. The card's endearment named the relationship the sender had, or pretended to have, with the dead. And the delivery date was the deadline. "He's not just killing them," June said, rubbing her eyes at 4 a.m. "Look, every card is affectionate, old friend, with love, rest now. He's grieving them while he orders it. Or he wants it to look like grief. Whoever this is, he loved these men. Or he wants everyone to think he did." Adrian went very still. "Say that again." "The cards are love letters," June said. "Every single one. Nobody sends a stranger a card that says, Rest now, old friend. This is someone burying his own family and enjoying the eulogy. It's someone who'll stand at the graves and mean it. And she watched Adrian Cord's face change as a suspicion he had refused to hold finally forced its way into the light. My uncle, he said. Silas. The name came out like something pulled from a wound. He gave the eulogy at Emil's funeral. He wept. I watched him weep. He stood so fast the chair went over. He has the codes. He was the one who argued hardest that I had turned. He's been consolidating the captains under himself as protection from me, while I bled trying to find the sender. A terrible, quiet laugh. He built it so that the more men I lost, the more the family ran to him. He's been eating the house from the inside, and grieving every bite. Can you prove it? June said. No. Adrian's eyes came to her, and she felt the weight of what she was to him land fully for the first time. But you can. You've met him. You just don't know it. The special account was set up in person in your shop 14 months ago by a man who paid a quarter in cash and told you he wanted the best florist in the mountains. He crossed to her, and now there was something almost pleading under the command. You remember faces. You remember hands. June, who set up the account, and June, who remembered every stem, went back 14 months in her mind to a snowy afternoon, and a well-dressed older man with silver at his temples, and a warm, sad smile, and beautiful manners. A man who had admired her ranunculus and paid in $100 bills, and told her that flowers were the only honest way left to speak to the dead. He had a scar, she said slowly, on the back of his right hand, like a burn. He kept his gloves off to count the money, and I remember thinking it was strange in that cold. She looked up. He said flowers were the only honest way left to speak to the dead. I thought it was the loveliest thing anyone had ever said in my shop. Adrian closed his eyes. Silas burned his hand pulling my father out of a car in 1994, he said. It's the reason I trusted him with everything. He opened his eyes, and they were the eyes of a man who has just watched his own history rewrite itself in blood. You just testified against the most powerful man in my world, June, and you did it from memory, which is why he will not stop until you are ash. The near touch happened that afternoon, in the gray hour when the storm eased and the mountain went silent. She'd fallen asleep on the couch without meaning to, and woke to find he'd put a blanket over her. Adrian Cord, who bandaged nothing but wounds, had covered her while she slept, and he was sitting across the room, cleaning a weapon in the dead light, and not looking at her, which was its own kind of looking. She sat up, the blanket slid. He came to check the bandage on her hand where the flying glass had caught her too, a cut she'd forgotten, and he crouched in front of her and took her hand and turned it to the light, and his thumb moved over the edge of the cut, and neither of them breathed. His hand was warm and enormous and scarred, and hers was small and stained faintly green at the cuticles, the way it always was, and he looked at them together for one long moment, as though her hand and his was a language he was trying to read and couldn't. He lifted his eyes to her face. He was close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in the gray, the exhaustion, the restraint holding him like a wire pulled to its limit. His gaze dropped once to her mouth. He did not close the distance. If I touch you now, he said very low, I'll do it because I want to, and I've spent a year telling myself everything I do about you is because I have to. I'd like to keep that lie a little longer. It's the only thing keeping you at arm's length from what I am. Maybe I don't want to be at arm's length, June said, and did not recognize her own voice. You will, Adrian said, when this is over, and you see what I have to do to make it over. He let go of her hand. She felt the loss of it like cold water, and stood and stepped back and put the room between them again. And June understood that his self-control was not coldness. It was the most possessive thing about him. He was rationing himself to her, like a man who knew that once he started, he would not be able to stop, and who loved her enough to be afraid of that on her behalf. Thursday, she said to have something to say. How do we stop it? We don't stop it, Adrian said. We use it. He turned back and the strategist was in his face again, and it was almost a relief. The order for Marcus is already placed and paid. The channel expects a delivery, so we make one. We fill your brother's death order exactly as written, same flowers, same card, your handwriting, and we deliver it ourselves to the address on Thursday. Silas will have a shooter waiting on that delivery as the signal. His eyes glittered. But it won't be Marcus who walks into it. It'll be me. And Silas doesn't know I've found you, so he doesn't know I can read his own language back to him. For once, June, the man who built the trap won't know which of us is holding the flowers. That's suicide, June said. That's Thursday, Adrian said. Can you make the arrangement? June looked at her stained hands, the hands that had signed 9 death warrants without knowing, and felt something in her turn from horror into resolve. I can make it, she said, and I can make it say something he's not expecting. Give me an hour and the right flowers, and I'll write him a card in his own language that he'll read too late. She stood. He taught me the alphabet. Let me spell something back. She built it at the great table while the sun went down red on the snow. It was, Adrian would say afterward, the most terrifying, beautiful thing he had ever watched a person do. She built the arrangement exactly to the order the marked flowers, the death grammar Silas expected, so that from 10 feet away it read as the sanctioned murder of Marcus Cord. But woven through it in the small choices only another fluent speaker would catch, she wrote a second message underneath, a sprig of tansy, I declare war on you. A single wrong, deliberate stem of foxglove, insincerity, a falsehood. And in the card in her careful, unmistakable hand, the words that would look to a shooter like a lover's farewell, and read to Silas Cord, when he finally saw the photographs, like a verdict. For the man who wept at every grave he dug. Rest now, old friend. J. He'll know I know, she said. When he sees it, he'll know his tool turned in his hand. He'll know, Adrian agreed, looking at her with something that had gone far past ownership. And it will make him careless, because men like Silas cannot bear to be read. You just handed me the first mistake he's going to make in 40 years. He reached out, stopped himself, and instead touched very lightly the tansy, the war flower at the arrangement's heart. You could have run tonight. I gave you a car and a name and papers an hour ago. You found them in the drawer. Don't pretend you didn't. She hadn't run. I signed those cards, June said simply. 9 of them. I don't get to run from the 10th. She looked at him. And I'm not going to lose the shop, or my hands, or you, to a man who thinks flowers are only good for funerals. Adrian Cord, who feared nothing, looked at the florist across the table, full of weaponized beauty, and said, God help him. Thursday came, gray and clear and very cold. The delivery address was a shuttered restaurant on the edge of Denver glass, front papered over a place that had been a Cord holding for years. Adrian went in the front at noon exactly, in his black overcoat, carrying June's arrangement in both hands, like a man carrying a heart. June was supposed to be a mile away in the SUV with the driver, and for the length of the drive, she had let them believe she would stay there. She did not stay there. Because she had spent the night reading the last month of orders one more time, the way she read everything too closely, and she had found the thing Adrian had missed. There was one more order, post-dated, prepaid, delivery date Thursday, delivery time 1 hour after Marcus. A second arrangement, small, meant for a woman, pink camellia, which in the old language means longing for you, and rue, which means warning, and a card with no name at all. She had built that one too, on Silas's instruction weeks ago, and never thought about who it was for. She thought about it now in the SUV, and went cold all the way through. It was for her. Silas had ordered his own florist's death, and post-dated it, the way he did everything, grieving in advance. And the delivery address on the second order was not the restaurant. It was her shop in Silver Hollow. He had known weeks ago that it would end at her counter. He had scheduled it. And the shooter, waiting an hour after Marcus, was not waiting for Marcus at all. Marcus was the decoy, the noise, the thing to draw Adrian and his men to Denver and empty the mountain, so that a second man could drive 2 hours up into the snow to a flower shop with a broken window, where the woman who could name him would surely, stubbornly, eventually return to sweep up the glass of her ruined life. Turn around, June said. Turn around, we have it backwards. The target isn't in Denver, the target is me. It's always been the shop. The driver was already keying his radio when the first shots came over it, tinny and distant from inside the restaurant, a mile away. Get him on the phone, June said. Get Adrian. He's engaged, the driver said flat, driving now. Hard snow spraying. That's gunfire. That means he's engaged. I can't. Then take me to the shop, June said. Take me home, because that's where the man with the burned hand is going. And he thinks I'll be alone, and I want to be there when he's wrong. Adrian Cord took 2 men down inside the papered-over restaurant, and a bullet along his ribs, and did not feel it because the shooter's last words before Adrian's hand closed on his collar were, "You're in the wrong place, boss. He knew you'd come. He sent me here to keep you here." And Adrian understood, one full breath too late, the shape of the whole thing, that the murder of Marcus had never been the murder of Marcus, that Silas had spent a bouquet to move him 100 miles from the one person on earth he could not lose, and that somewhere, in the snow above the tree line, an old man with a warm, sad smile was driving toward a broken flower shop. He came out of the restaurant into the cold phone, already at his ear, blood on his side, and his own voice sounded like something breaking. Silver Hollow, all of it, now. But Silver Hollow was 2 hours away in good weather, and this was not good weather, and June's SUV was already climbing into the storm, and the man with the burned hand was already there. June saw the single set of tire tracks in the fresh snow outside her shop, and knew. The window was still shattered, boarded over now with plywood. Someone kindly meant the open sign, still hanging crooked, and inside, past the wreck of the display cooler and the dead flowers going brown, a light was on that she had not left on. She told the driver to stay with the car and radio Adrian, and the driver told her in the plain voice of a man who had guarded terrible people his whole life, that he could not let her go in there. And June told him that she had made the arrangement that had just gotten men killed in Denver, and she was not going to hide from the last one. And then she went in through the back before he could stop her, because she knew every board that creaked in her own shop, and he did not. Silas Cord was sitting at her work table in the low light, an arrangement half built in front of him. Her flowers, her shears, his burned hand moving through the stems with a clumsy tenderness. And he looked up when she came in, and smiled the warm, sad smile she remembered from 14 months ago. And it broke her heart, even as it turned her blood to ice, because she understood at last that he meant every terrible thing he did. "June," he said as though she were an old friend, "I hoped you'd come. I so hate to do this over the phone." He set down a yellow carnation. "Rejection. You are no longer wanted here. You read the second order. I can see it in your face. You always did read too well. It's the thing I admired most about you, and the thing I couldn't let live." He sighed and looked at the flowers with real grief. "You made my instrument beautiful. I'll miss the work. I truly will." "You wept at their funerals," June said. "Emile, all of them. You loved them." "Of course I loved them," Silas said, wounded that she'd doubt it. "You don't understand power, dear. You give a eulogy, so the room sees a man who grieves, and a grieving man cannot possibly be the one who did it. Love is the best alibi there is. I loved every one of them. And I sent every one of them your flowers, and I meant both." He stood, and there was a weapon in his good hand, now held low and easy. "Adrian's the same. He'll grieve you the rest of his life. I'm giving him that. It's more than he'd give me." "Adrian knows," June said. "He's coming." "Adrian is in Denver," Silas said gently, burying his brother, who is also fine, because it was never about the bodies, June. It was only ever about the story. And the story is that my nephew went mad and murdered his own family through a mountain florist. And the last chapter is that he killed her too, to hide it in a jealous rage. I've written it, lovely. You'd appreciate the structure. He raised the weapon. "Say something for the card. I'll make it beautiful. It's the least I owe you." And June Calloway, who spoke the old language better than the man who had made her a weapon in it, looked at the arrangement on her own work table, and saw in the half-second she had, the one thing she had that he did not know she had. "You forgot the tansy," she said. Silas glanced down, just for an instant, just long enough because a fluent man cannot help but check his own grammar. And in that instant, June's hand closed on the shears at the edge of the table, and she was already moving, and the plywood over the front window exploded inward for the second time in a week as Adrian Cord came through it at a dead run. He had not been in Denver. He had turned the whole caravan north the second he understood he had driven the mountain roads at speeds that should have killed him, had been 90 seconds behind her the entire climb, and gaining, and he came through the boarded window in a storm of snow and splinters, with his weapon up, and Silas turned toward the noise, and for one frozen instant, the three of them stood in the wreck of the flower shop, in a triangle with June at its point, shears in her fist, an old man's gun swinging between the nephew he'd framed and the florist he'd doomed. "Adrian," Silas said, delighted terrible, "you've ruined the ending." "You wrote it wrong," Adrian said. "You made her the last chapter. You should have made her the first. You should have known that. The day I found her was the day you lost." His eyes flicked to June. "Are you hurt?" And back all in a heartbeat. "Put it down, Silas. There are 12 men outside. It's over. The captains are already turning. I sent them the photographs of your flowers an hour ago. They can all read grief now." And June watched 40 years of certainty crack in the old man's face, watched him understand that his masterpiece had been read back to him in his own hand, that the tansy at the heart of Marcus's arrangement, "I declare war," had been photographed and sent to every captain in the family with a single line. He wrote every one of these, read them again, watched Silas Cord realize that the florist he'd used as a tool had built the one message he couldn't survive. He turned the gun on June, because he was a man who at the end could not bear that she had read him. Adrian did not shout. He simply moved the way he had moved the first night, all of him, without a fraction of hesitation, and put his body between the old man and the woman, and the shot went into him and not her. And June screamed for the first time since the account had come in, screamed as Adrian's weapon answered once, and Silas Cord folded down over the work table he'd been arranging her death at, one burned hand coming to rest at the very end in the flowers. Then there was only the wind in the broken window and the snow coming in, and Adrian Cord going to his knees in the wreck of her shop, with his blood running bright over the brown and dying flowers, and June going down with him, catching him, her stained hands pressed to the hole in his side. "You're not allowed," she was saying. "You are not allowed. You covered me twice. You don't get to look at me." June. His hand came up red and cupped her face and left a print of himself on her cheek. "I need you to listen. The captains," a breath that cost him. "The captains will follow whoever holds the family. That's you now. You're the only one who can read what he wrote. You're the only clean thing. Stop talking like you're leaving." She tore her scarf off, packed it into the wound, bound it with the ruthless precision of a woman who bandaged him once in a moving car, and swore she'd do it again. "You watched me for a year in the cold. You covered me from the glass. You drove a mountain in a blizzard to stand between me and a gun. You do not get to do all of that and then leave me in a flower shop, Adrian Cord. I won't fill the arrangement. I refuse the order. Do you hear me? I refuse it." And Adrian Cord, dying and not dying, looked up at the florist holding his life in her hands and laughed once red, wondering. "You can't refuse an order," he whispered. "Watch me," June said, and held on, and the 12 men came through the door, and somewhere far below, the storm was already breaking. He lived. It was a near thing, 3 surgeries and a private room in a luxury hospital in Denver, where June did not leave, where she slept in a chair with her stained hands wrapped around his, and the captains of the Cord family filed through one by one, to look at the woman who had read the traitor's grief, and see whether the story about her was true. She did not perform for them. She sat with him. She trimmed the flowers people sent. Real flowers, meaningless ones, get well and thank you, and nothing coded underneath. And she taught herself to enjoy an arrangement that only meant what it said. On the 4th day, Adrian woke fully and found her there. And for a long time, neither of them said anything because the silence between them had always been the truest part. "You held on," he said at last. "You noticed," she said. He turned his hand under hers so their palms met scarred and stained, the way he'd looked at them a lifetime ago in the firelight, when he couldn't read the language of it. He could read it now. "I told you," he said low, "that you'd want to be at arm's length when you saw what I had to do to end it." "I saw," June said. "You put yourself between me and a bullet, twice." She leaned in until there was no distance left to ration, until she could feel his breath, until the wire of his restraint finally at last went slack. "I've decided the difference between ownership and love, Adrian. You wanted to teach me, and it turned out to be my lesson to teach you." Her forehead came to his. "Ownership keeps a thing behind glass. Love comes through the glass when it breaks. You've never once kept me behind the glass. You keep coming through it." And Adrian Cord, feared by everyone cold to the whole world, turned his face into her stained and steady hands, and let himself, for the first time in a life built on rationing, take all of it. And June kissed him in a room full of flowers that meant nothing but what they were. And outside the window it had finally stopped snowing. She reopened the shop in spring. New glass, wider, brighter, her name in gold. The corporate account was gone, and she did not miss it. She had learned that she was fluent in a dangerous language, and she had decided what she would say in it. She kept on the counter where anyone could see it, a single small arrangement she rebuilt fresh every week. Pink camellia, for longing, ivy, for fidelity, I cling to you, and one deliberate stem of tansy at the heart, because I declare war on you, had become between the two of them the closest thing they had to I love you. and neither of them had ever been any good at saying the ordinary words. Adrian came at closing most days in his black overcoat, and stood in the doorway the way he had the first night, and looked at her the way he'd looked at her the first night, like the one thing in the room he'd come for. And June would look up from her scissors and let him wait a beautiful moment before she smiled. The bell over the door still rang, but now she always looked up,